Have you ever wondered about the economic soul of America? What were the founding principles that shaped this nation's prosperity? It's a question that gets to the heart of our identity. Let's travel back in time, not just to 1776, but even earlier, to the very first colonies, and unpack the economic DNA that was coded into America from its inception. From the moment the first European settlers set foot on this continent, the driving force was opportunity. It wasn't a quest to establish a collective, state-controlled society. The Virginia Company, which founded Jamestown in 1607, wasn't a government mission. It was a joint stock company. Think of it as an early version of a startup, funded by private investors who were betting on the potential for profit in the New World. They were seeking returns on their investment, primarily through resources like gold, timber, and tobacco. This was capitalism in its rawest form: risk, investment, and the pursuit of profit. Early on, there were experiments with communal living, like in Jamestown and Plymouth. The settlers pooled their resources and shared the fruits of their labor equally. But what happened? The results were disastrous. When everyone gets the same reward regardless of how hard they work, what's the incentive to work hard? Governor William Bradford of the Plymouth colony wrote about this very problem. He noted that the communal system bred confusion, discontent, and severely hampered productivity. The young men who did the most work resented laboring for other men's wives and children without any extra compensation. So, what did they do? They changed course. Bradford and the other leaders decided to assign a parcel of land to each family. They could then work their own land and keep the profits from their harvest. The result was a dramatic turnaround. People suddenly had a powerful incentive to work diligently. They planted more corn, became more industrious, and the colony began to thrive. This wasn't a political theory being debated in a salon. It was a real-world lesson in human nature and economics. Private property and the ability to profit from one's own labor weren't just abstract ideas. They were the keys to survival and prosperity. This principle echoed across the colonies. From the tobacco plantations in the South to the shipbuilding and trade industries in New England, the colonial economy was a tapestry of private enterprise. Merchants, artisans, farmers, they were all entrepreneurs in their own right. They were making decisions based on supply and demand, seeking out new markets and innovating to become more efficient. The British Crown tried to control this burgeoning economic engine through mercantilism, imposing taxes and regulations like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. But what was the American response? Revolution. The American Revolution was, in many ways, an economic rebellion. The cry of no taxation without representation was fundamentally a demand for economic freedom. The colonists were tired of a distant government dictating their economic lives, stifling their trade, and seizing their wealth without their consent. They believed they had a natural right to the fruits of their labor and to engage in free enterprise. When the Founding Fathers gathered to frame the Constitution, these economic principles were front and center. While the word capitalism doesn't appear in the document, its foundations are embedded throughout. The Fifth Amendment, for instance, protects private property with the Takings Clause. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This is a cornerstone of a capitalist system. It ensures that the government can't just seize what you've worked for. The Constitution also created a large free trade zone among the states, breaking down the internal barriers that had stifled commerce under the Articles of Confederation. It gave Congress the power to create a stable currency and enforce contracts. These measures weren't designed to create a socialist utopia or a state-run economy. They were designed to create a stable and predictable environment where private individuals could freely invest, innovate, and trade with one another. Think about Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury. His financial plan was all about establishing a robust capitalist economy. He advocated for the federal government to assume state debts, establish a national bank, and encourage manufacturing. His goal was to create a dynamic market economy driven by private ambition but supported by a strong and stable financial infrastructure. He understood that for a nation to be powerful, its economy had to be unleashed, not shackled. His debates with Thomas Jefferson, who envisioned a more agrarian society, were really about the best way to foster prosperity. But even Jefferson, with his emphasis on the independent yeoman farmer, was championing a vision based on private property and individual economic freedom. Compare this to the core tenets of socialism or communism. These ideologies, which emerged much later in the 19th century with thinkers like Karl Marx, advocate for the collective or state ownership of the means of production, the factories, the land, the capital. They prioritize the collective over the individual and seek to eliminate private property and the profit motive. This is the polar opposite of the system the American founders established. They didn't see the state as the engine of prosperity. They saw the individual as the engine. The government's role was to protect the rights of that individual, including their economic rights, so they could be free to create, produce, and build a better life for themselves and their families. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, this capitalist framework fueled an unprecedented explosion of innovation and wealth creation. The Industrial Revolution, the rise of the railroads, the invention of the automobile, the dawn of the computer age, and the Internet revolution, all were driven by entrepreneurs and innovators working within a system that rewarded risk-taking and ingenuity. Of course, American capitalism has never been a pure laissez-faire system. The government has always played a role in regulation, social safety nets, and infrastructure. There have been ongoing debates about the proper balance between free markets and government intervention, debates that continue to this day. But the fundamental orientation, the default setting established at the very beginning, was one of economic liberty. The story of America is the story of a nation founded not on the principle of collective ownership or state control, but on the belief that individuals, when free to pursue their own economic interests, will create a more prosperous and dynamic society for everyone. It was a radical experiment at the time, and it's a legacy that continues to shape our world. The evidence isn't found in a single quote or document, but in the entire arc of American history, from the first joint stock companies to the Silicon Valley startups of today. The nation began as a capitalist venture, and that spirit of enterprise is woven into its very fabric. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey through America's economic history interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. See you next time.